I'm working on a cable book that I expect to come out and be published during the year 2020. And as I develop it, I'm making videos to help you with the future patterns, but you can play with the cables right now if you want to. This is one of the patterns. It's a diamond cable scarf, and you're seeing a background of seed stitch, actually edges and ends of seed stitch, but a background of purl stitches with knit stitch cables. We make that happen by letting those stitches that are on the riverbed function as purl stitches, and those on the main bed are knit stitches, and we move them from side to side to get the cable moving across the background. Here is the needle setup we start with. I'll explain in a little bit more detail shortly. In order to keep track of which stitches are supposed to be seed stitches and which are involved in the cable and the cable background, I like to mark the needle bed. This is a grease pencil, otherwise known as a China marker, and it'll wipe right off later. We start with this needle setup. Note that I've made orange marks with this grease pencil to separate the needles that are involved in seed stitch and those that are involved in the cable. On each side, 6 needles are involved in seed stitch. The center 16 are involved in the cable, and the setup keeps changing every 2 rows. So let's knit those 2. This design is not difficult. The main worry is that you will lose your place. So the best way to avoid that is to be very methodical. First, I'm moving the main bed stitches that are involved in the cable. This row, both pairs move away from center 1 stitch. Now the background stitches that are on the river are in the way, and they must be moved over so as not to be in the way of the main bed stitches. Actually, I made a mistake, so we'll fix that. This one should come over 2 places because it has to make up for the change of position of 2 stitches. They both came over 2 places. So now we leave 2 empty stitches on the river because the main bed stitches are taking their place. Every row, I'm going to leave both of the end stitches on the main bed, well, every other row, but every time we do this, and transfer 5 from bed to bed for the seed stitch. So I'm going to always work from left to right so as not to confuse myself. Outside of the orange mark, and move these 5 from bed to bed. I am showing you this with bulky yarn, but of course the same thing can be done at any gauge. There's my 5th stitch. The outer stitch stays on the main bed. Every time we transfer and make the cable cross, we then knit 2 rows. I'm not always going to show you those 2 rows because you certainly know how to knit without my help. Same 2 stitches, move out another space on each side. And we move the river stitches that are now conflicting with the main bed stitches over towards these other river stitches. They'll be forming the background. And now I transfer 5 on the left and 5 on the right. I'm also not going to film every time I do the 5 stitch transfers, because that is very repetitive and you can understand it from a couple of run-throughs. It's the same every time, except last time we transferred from the main bed to the river for this stitch, and from the river to the main bed for this stitch, and the next time we reverse the operation because we start where the stitches are. And time to knit 2 rows. 2 rows are knitted. This pair of stitches moves out from center. This pair also moves out from center. This moves over by 2 positions, as does this one. So now we have 6 in the center and only 3 background stitches on each side. It looks like 4 here, and it's so easy to get confused when you say, I've got 4. But remember, this one outside of the orange mark is part of the seed stitch pattern. Time to work the seed stitch transfers and then knit 2 rows. Time to move these out again, and this will be the last time before we change directions. So out, out, move the river stitches over 2 needle spaces. One way to remember this is that you should always end up with a solid block of river stitches in the middle. There shouldn't be any gaps. I'll work the seed stitch and we'll proceed. My 2 rows are knitted, and take note that by the outer edge of our diamond shape, there are only 2 background stitches on each edge of the 16 stitch span. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the center. Now you could work a very similar pattern adjusting those counts. It doesn't have to be this one, but for the pattern I'm showing you, it is. The same principle, though, applies to other numbers. And now we begin to move our 2 traveling stitches on each side inward and move the background stitches that are on the river outward, still maintaining a solid block of stitches at the center, working a seed stitch every other row, and then knitting 2 more rows. Our traveling pairs move inward towards one another again. The background stitches move out 2 places to make room for the traveling pair on the fabric. And I work the seed stitch. Inward again. Of course, I knitted 2 rows after finishing the seed stitch. We're almost back where we started. We'll get there next time. River stitches outward. One thing that I should point out, these edges tend to get sloppy, especially in a heavy yarn like this. So I always hang substantial extra weight at the edges and move it up frequently. You can see the stitches adjusting. And this is the last inward movement for this repeat of the pattern. Now all 4 stitches are side by side, and after working the seed stitch and knitting the next 2 rows, we'll change up and make the only actual cable cross on these needles, those 4 stitches. So let's do the seed stitch, knit, and I'll be right back. For this, we need 2 sets of 2-prong tools, I'm going to pick up all the stitches and cross one set with the other. I tend to go right over left. For this design, it really doesn't matter. You can do the left side first if you want to, but you should be consistent throughout the design. Nothing moves on the river because we did not move anything out here. However, the machine is under some stress from these cross stitches, and they will knit back from hold a little more easily than from their normal position. Of course, we do work the seed stitch after the cable cross because we want that pattern to remain continuous up the piece of knitting. See how that helped? And now the whole thing begins again. If you enjoy cables as much as I do, you may also enjoy these books that are already out. Can These Be Cables is full of faux cables. Wanderlust Cables is full of cables that travel on a knit stitch background, so no river is required. And there are also some nice cable designs in Bigger Than Bulky Machine Knits, the Warm Hands Workbook, made for mid-gauge, the Bulky Cotton Tops collection, and Socks of All Sorts 3. Those are boot toppers that are cabled.